No-code platforms like Bubble, for example, don't require any coding, but still have you programming an app. It's just happening visually, which means that throughout development, you're still going to see and use technical terms even though you're not actually working with code to go along with them. Understanding these terms can give you a massive boost in development speed, while also allowing you to leverage the tools and techniques you may completely be unaware of otherwise. Ultimately, all this means is that you'll be able to build an app better and faster, still without any coding involved. So in this video, we're going to go through the most important lingo you need to know as a no-coder, starting with the difference between front-end and back-end development. Front-end and back-end development are two crucial aspects of building an app, each serving distinct purposes. Front-end development focuses on the user interface and experience. It's everything that users interact with directly. This includes the layout, design, and interactive elements of an app. In traditional code, a developer could be focused completely on the front-end environment, working with traditional languages like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create these visible elements. HTML structures the content, CSS styles it, and JavaScript adds interactivity, such as animations or dynamic content updates. Essentially, front-end development shapes what users see and how they interact with your app. Back-end development, on the other hand, handles the server side of the app. It's responsible for processing data, managing databases, and running the business logic that powers the app. This includes tasks like retrieving data from a database, processing user requests, and ensuring the app functions correctly behind the scenes. Back-end developers use traditional languages like Java, Python, or PHP to build these functionalities. They work with servers, databases, and application logic to ensure that the front end has the right data and functionality to display. So while front-end development focuses on creating a user-friendly interface and an interactive experience, the back-end development is going to ensure that all of your app's core functionalities, your data processing, and server interactions work seamlessly to support that user experience. And these terms are not foreign to the no-code world. In Bubble, you are also addressing both your front end and back end of your application. So now I want to break down a few more terms that actually fall under these categories of front-end development and back-end development. They're common terms. You probably will see them come up when you have plugins installed to your app or if you're looking through resources around app development. I'm not going to teach you any code here, but just having the definition will provide you some context and hopefully give you some more clarity in your own work. Let's start with HTML, which you've probably heard of. This is really common with even most website builders. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Now, you'll rarely see it spelled out in full like that. You'll usually just see the abbreviation. And HTML is the backbone of any web page. It's used to create and structure your content, like your headings, your paragraphs, images, and links. So imagine HTML as the structure of a house. It defines what rooms there are and where they go. And in a no-code platform, HTML is generally automatically created for you based on the elements you place on your page. So for instance, in Bubble, whenever you drag and drop an element, a text, an image, anything like that, a button, onto your design canvas, what's happening behind the scenes is that Bubble is creating the corresponding HTML code. It's just a set of instructions, structured instructions, on where everything lives in the design of the page. In fact, if you preview any page of your application and open up the developer console of that page, you can just right-click, select Inspect. You'll actually see all of the underlying HTML code for your page there for you. This is all of the code that's created for you, and it's really the code that's powering your application behind the scenes without you actually having to write it yourself. Now, let's talk about CSS. This stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Again, you'll typically see this abbreviated. CSS controls how your HTML content looks. Okay, so it handles the visual elements such as colors, fonts, and layouts. Think of CSS as the interior design of the house. It decides how the furniture is arranged and what colors the walls are painted. No-code tools will also often manage CSS automatically, but they'll generally provide more user-friendly interfaces for you to customize those styles, again, so that you don't actually have to write the code yourself. So again, in Bubble, you're going to use your property editor or your styles that you can define to change those fonts and colors and the spacing between elements without needing to write the CSS yourself. And the last front-end development term we'll look at here is JavaScript. Now, JavaScript makes your web pages interactive. It's responsible for dynamic features like animations, form validation, and user interactions. So if HTML is the structure and CSS is the style, then JavaScript is like the automation system in a smart home. Okay, it controls various elements based on user actions. So even though no-code platforms handle most of this for you, you might still need to use JavaScript for some custom interactions. And in Bubble, what you're really going to be working with here are your workflows. This is typically where you'll create that dynamic behavior to make things come to life. You do have the option in Bubble to add custom JavaScript if you need advanced functionality. Okay, that wasn't too bad, right? So now we'll look at some terms that fall under that back-end development category. Now, in the backend, there's actually many different programming languages that can be used to create the backend of an application. So you have things like Java, Python, PHP, Ruby, and .NET. And some developers may only work within one language, or they may be experienced in multiples. But at the end of the day, all of these languages handle server-side operations, such as managing databases, processing user requests, and running the business logic of the app. And in traditional development, these languages are essential, but with no-code tools, you don't need to worry about them, right? In Bubble, all you need to do is create dynamic expressions. It's a much more simplified way of creating the logic you need, and you can create incredibly sophisticated logic, right? In Bubble, you're adding these expressions to your conditions, to your visual elements, and of course in your workflows. And the workflows themselves are also a part of creating that logic to make things come to life. Okay, so a couple more terms here for backend development. And we're going to use a metaphor. Imagine you're setting up a new physical store where you want to sell products. So in this metaphor, the domain is like the street address of your store. It's the address people use to find you, such as www.mystore.com. Just as an address helps customers locate your physical store, a domain name helps people find your app on the internet. It's how they can easily remember and visit your app. Hosting is like the physical space where your store is located. Okay, it's the actual building or shop where your store's inventory, equipment, and products are housed. So in the digital world, hosting refers to the servers and storage where your website's files, data, and content are kept. Just as your store needs a physical location to operate, your app needs a hosting service to be accessible online. And for a Bubble application, you actually don't need to worry about the hosting part because Bubble handles that for you. Your application is actually hosted with Amazon Web Services behind the scenes. For the domain part, you do need to purchase that yourself. You can do this on GoDaddy, Bluehost, Squarespace. There are a number of sites where you can get a domain, and Bubble will give you instructions so that you can configure connecting your domain or your app's address to the actual application itself. Now, there are some hybrid elements that actually leverage both the front end and back end sides of your application, and the main one that I want to focus on here is SEO. SEO, or search engine optimization, is all about improving your app's visibility on search engines like Google. It involves optimizing your content so that search engines can easily understand and rank it properly. And a crucial part of SEO is something called meta tags. This is a meta tag is something that provides information about your app or metadata, like the title and description of a page. Okay, and these can influence how your page appears in search results, right? You want to make sure that you actually come up as a relevant result in searches. And Bubble actually offers a lot of different capabilities over configuring your SEO settings. Now, SEO does require a bit of strategy, so it is helpful to know how to properly adjust your meta tags and implement SEO using best practices so that you can really enhance your app's discoverability, because that's what SEO is all about after all. It's just improving your visibility on the web. Real quick, while all of these technical terms are helpful for building an app on any no-code platform, we personally use Bubble with our own founders and students because of how powerful we found it to be for things like customization and control. So if you're doing the same or you're thinking about doing so, take a look at our guide over at coachingnocodeapps.com/bubble-guide. It'll walk you through all the ins and outs of the platform to help add even more depth to what we're talking about in this video. So check out the link on the screen or in the description below. All right, on to the next category of terms. So next up are data formats, and more specifically, how data can be structured so that applications can work with it more effectively. You're likely to run into these terms if you're working with integrations. You may also recognize some other terms just in general. Some are a little bit more popular than others. Let's start with the simple one. Plain text and rich text. You've probably seen these terms in the context of emails. Plain text contains no formatting whatsoever, while rich text includes formatting options for bolds, italics, and bullet points. Okay, so plain text is used for simple data, while rich text is used for content that requires more complex formatting. In Bubble, if you open up the property editor for any text element, by default, you're creating plain text when you type into the box. But Bubble does actually offer a rich text editor. And alongside that, all of your general appearance property settings are allowing you to create rich text out of your content that you've typed in. So you actually have a couple different ways to create rich text. But you see how this is kind of built in for you just by leveraging the tools that are there in the platform. The next format here is CSV, or comma separated values. CSV is a traditional format for storing tabular data, often used with spreadsheets. So if you've worked with Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, you've probably heard of CSV before. It's very simple and straightforward, making it a common choice for data exports and imports. In fact, if you just open up a CSV file in a regular text editor like your Notepad app, you'll get a better sense of how CSV data is structured. In your Bubble editor, you'll actually see that there are places where you can import data using a CSV file, as well as exporting data from your app to a CSV file. Now, this next format is one that you'll usually see when you're working with API integrations, and this is called JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation. This is another one that you'll generally see abbreviated. JSON is a lightweight format used for organizing and transmitting data. It's easy to read and write, making it ideal for web apps. So if your app needs to exchange data with another service, it's very likely going to be using this format to organize all of the information. And here's a little pro tip for you. If you do have API integrations where you need to structure data in a JSON format, take a look at jsonlint.com. This is a validator that'll help you confirm you've got all of your syntax right. You know, if you have a misplaced comma or period somewhere, an extra space somewhere, this will catch those things for you so that you don't hit any errors. Now, XML is another format for data exchange. It's more verbose than JSON, which can make it harder to work with. JSON is more popular in modern applications, but XML is definitely still used in systems. So understanding both formats can help you work with different types of data. Again, you're generally going to see these if you're working with API integrations. Now, I've mentioned API a few times, so I actually want to drill into this category a bit further. APIs are a more technical aspect of app development, and so naturally we're going to see a lot more terms, a lot more technical terms. So let's take a look at some of the more popular ones you may run into. Let's start with API itself. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's essentially a set of rules and tools that allows different software applications to communicate with one another. Okay, so think of an API as a waiter in a restaurant. You tell the waiter what you want, so this is your request, and the waiter delivers that request to the kitchen or the server or the service. The kitchen then prepares the food, okay, so this is the processing of that request, and then the waiter brings it back to you, okay, so data is returned back to you. APIs facilitate this interaction between different software systems. This enables them to exchange information and perform functions without needing to understand the inner workings of each other. Now, one term that you'll likely run into, especially as you're going through API documentation, is curl. Curl is a tool for interacting with APIs. It allows you to send requests and view responses, which is really helpful for testing and debugging. In fact, you'll typically see this tool embedded in API documentation sites. So for example, you can use curl to check and see if an API endpoint is working correctly and see the data that it returns. The next two API-related terms are REST and SOAP, and these are two different styles for designing APIs. Now, more often than not, you're going to be working within the REST style, but occasionally, especially if you're working with transactions, you may see the SOAP style appear. Now, the difference between these two, in short, is that REST is simpler and more flexible. It's great for web applications. It uses the JSON structure for data formats. and it can handle other formats as well. It just makes it really easy to work with. SOAP, on the other hand, is more strict and complicated. It always uses XML as its data format, but it is great for large, secure systems like banks because it has built-in features for security and handling things like transactions. Now, there's also a few different terms as it relates to security for APIs. The first is OAuth. OAuth is a framework for authorizing users to access their data from other services. So for example, if you want users to log into your app using their Google account, this is where OAuth will handle the authorization process securely. It allows users to grant your app permission, to get into those accounts and pull out data from it without actually sharing their passwords. And there are different levels of access that can be configured there too. Basic auth, or basic authentication, is a simpler method for API access. It uses a username and password. It's less secure than OAuth, but it can be suitable for simpler applications where security requirements are lower. Then you have API key, client, and secret. These are all credentials that are used to authenticate API requests. So an API key is a unique identifier for your app, while a client ID and secret are used for more secure authentication. I mean, you can think of all of these as different types of passwords. These credentials are really there to ensure that only the authorized users can access certain data or services. And if you are integrating your Bubble application with the outside world, you're generally going to be using a tool called the API connector in Bubble. This is a plugin that allows you to configure all of your API requests. The nice thing is that Bubble has presets for all of these different types of authentication methods to make it easier for you to get connected. Now, speaking of security, there are other security terms that are not related to APIs, but just application security in general. Let's take a look. The first two terms talk about transforming your data into different values for different reasons. And I'm calling these out because you'll find these functions within your Bubble editor, and you may run into needing these functions if you're working with integrations where data needs to be secured or transmitted in a specific way. The first one is base64, and this is a type of encoding system. Base64 will convert data into a specific format for easy transmission or even storage. And then it can be decoded back to the original form. This is actually very common for handling data like images or files in text formats. You can actually convert, believe it or not, images and files into pure text formats by using the base64 system without even changing the data. Okay. Now the next one here, SHA-256, this is actually a hashing algorithm. So this is more for security. It's not just a basic encoding method. Hashing means it transforms data into a fixed size code, so to speak, or in other words, a hash. And this cannot be reversed. So you can't reveal the original data. It's really mainly used for security purposes to, for example, verify data integrity or storing passwords. The next security-related terms are HTTPS, SSL, and TLS. So you're probably familiar with HTTPS. You'll typically see that at the beginning of a web address. And these are all standards for encrypting data transmitted between users, on a browser and the server. So they ensure that sensitive information like your login credentials, personal data, all of that is secure. Most no-code platforms, Bubble included, will include HTTPS by default. So this way you don't have to worry about setting anything up manually. It's already handled for you. The next two terms are SOC 2 and GDPR. SOC 2 is a compliance standard for data security and privacy. It ensures that your app follows best practices for protecting user data. And no-code platforms will typically handle this SOC 2 compliance for you. Bubble does. Bubble is SOC 2 compliant, so you don't have to do anything extra to ensure your app meets those industry standards, but it is helpful to know about so that you can pass it on to your users if necessary. GDPR is a regulation for data protection and privacy in the European Union, so if you have a user base in the EU, this is going to be good to know. It governs how personal data is collected, how it's processed and stored. While some aspects of this devices are going to be managed by Bubble for you because Bubble is GDPR compliant, you do want to be aware of GDPR to make sure that you're fully compliant with all data protection laws, right? There might still be some extra steps that you need to take, such as presenting the user with a way to intentionally opt in to cookies if you need to leverage cookies for your app's functionality. So understanding these technical terms should help you navigate the app building process just a little bit better, especially if you're working with things like integrations. All right, I hope this was helpful, and if it was, the content you're about to see on the next screen should help you take things even further.